Ever since modern democracies were born, we've lived under the illusion that the freedom to vote also means the freedom not to vote. But let's look at the data. In Australia, where voting has been mandatory for almost a century, turnout exceeds 90%. In the United States, with voluntary voting, only 62% of citizens decide who will govern everyone. When the silent majority stays silent, who truly speaks for the people?
Freedom is not an illusion. It is the very foundation of democracy. Forcing citizens to vote is like forcing someone to go to church. You get attendance, not faith. Australia may boast impressive numbers, but at what cost? Millions of people dragged to the polls against their will, many of whom cast random or invalid ballots. A genuine democracy is not measured by the quantity of its votes, but by their quality.
Quality is born from representation. In voluntary systems, who votes the most? The wealthy, the educated, the privileged. Who stays home? The poor, minorities, the young. It's no coincidence that after Venezuela abolished compulsory voting in 1993, economic inequality rose sharply. When we let only one part of society speak, policies inevitably favor that part.
So your solution is to force those who don't want to speak to do so? If people don't vote, we should be asking why, not punishing them. The real inequality is treating the vote of an informed, passionate citizen exactly the same as someone who picks the first name on the ballot to avoid a fine. A study in Brazil revealed a substantial share of random votes, especially for less visible offices. Is this the democracy we want?
You see, your argument hides a dangerous prejudice. The idea that there are citizens worthy of voting and others who are not. History has taught us where that logic leads. Compulsory voting doesn't punish, it empowers. In Australia, not only is turnout high, but 87% of Australians say they would continue to vote even without the mandate. Why? Because duty becomes habit, and habit becomes culture.
I'm not talking about merit, but about choice. A citizen who consciously decides not to vote is still expressing a political position. Jehovah's Witnesses abstain for religious reasons, anarchists for philosophical conviction. A mature democracy must also respect silent dissent. In Belgium, where penalties for not voting exist but are rarely enforced, the mandate becomes a farce. A law that threatens but doesn't act is worse than no law at all.
You talk about choice, but you ignore the prisoner's dilemma that marginalized groups face. For a single individual, especially if they are poor, the costs of voting, time, information, transportation, seem greater than the benefits. Abstention appears rational, but collectively, it's a trap. The very groups that most need representation end up excluding themselves. Compulsory voting breaks this vicious cycle.
Do you know what really breaks the cycle? Removing the actual barriers to voting. Automatic registration, weekend voting, more polling stations in disadvantaged neighborhoods. These interventions increase turnout without coercion. An experiment in Quebec showed that compelling young people to vote through incentives increased neither their attention nor their knowledge of politics. Civic engagement cannot be imposed from above.
You're offering me palliatives when a cure is needed. These interventions improve turnout by a few percentage points, while compulsory voting increases it by 12 to 30%. But there's an even deeper effect. In countries with mandatory voting, parties don't waste resources on getting out the vote for their base. Instead, they focus on programs and ideas that can convince the silent majority. The result? Less polarization, more moderation.
Forced moderation is not a virtue, it's a mask. Polarization can be problematic, but it reflects real divisions in society. Artificially suppressing it with compulsory voting is like putting a bandage on a fracture. The legitimacy derived from an inflated turnout is an illusion. As International Idea rhetorically asks, is a government really more legitimate if high voter turnout is against the will of the voters?
Allow me to turn your logic around. Is a government elected by half the population, often the more privileged half, truly more legitimate? In Chile, after compulsory voting was abolished in 2012, turnout plummeted below 50%, triggering a legitimacy crisis so severe that they had to reinstate it in 2023. The result? Turnout jumped from 44% to 86%. Isn't this proof that citizens recognize the value of universal participation?
What happened in Chile proves my exact point. Dramatic swings in turnout reveal that there is no consensus on the value of compulsion. A healthy democracy shouldn't swing between extremes, but build a genuine civic culture. You say compulsory voting encourages citizens to become informed, but studies in Austria and Argentina found little to no evidence of this effect. In fact, in some contexts, a decrease in political interest was recorded.
And yet the study on Brazil tells a different story. There, voting is mandatory for citizens between 18 and 69, but voluntary for 16 and 17-year-olds, and for those over 70. This natural experiment revealed that the mandate significantly increases not only turnout, but also political information, especially among the poorest citizens. The mandate is not just a matter of numbers, but of social justice.
We finally arrive at the heart of the matter. You want to sacrifice individual liberty on the altar of a supposed social justice. But this paternalistic approach assumes that the state knows better than its citizens what is in their best interest. In a voluntary system, abstention functions as a self-selection mechanism. Those who don't feel adequately informed can choose not to vote, leaving the decision to those who are more prepared.
This isn't about paternalism. It's about recognizing that certain individual freedoms must be balanced with collective responsibilities. Compulsory voting is no more tyrannical than compulsory taxes or compulsory education, all accepted as necessary for a functioning society. And let's remember, the obligation is to show up at the polls, not to support a candidate. Blank or spoiled ballots are legitimate expressions of protest, but they are visible and measurable, unlike abstention, which can mean everything and nothing.
There's a fundamental difference. Taxes fund essential services, and education builds capable minds. But forcing a vote produces neither services nor capabilities. It imposes an empty civic ritual. And when the state imposes penalties on those who don't participate, it creates a regressive tax that hits the poorest the hardest. In Peru, those who don't vote risk losing access to public services. Is this your social justice? Punishing those who are already disadvantaged?
That's why any system of compulsory voting must include reasonable exemptions and proportional penalties. In Australia, the fine is minimal, about $20, and you can provide justifications for your absence. It is a true government of the people. Isn't that the essence of democracy?